What would you do if the two people you trusted most, the love of your life and your closest friend, stabbed you in the back? I didn't see it coming, but their betrayal destroyed everything, and set me on a path to rebuild a life I never thought possible. I grew up in a small, sleepy town where life moved slowly, but beneath the surface, there was always a buzz of quiet drama. My parents were the embodiment of traditional values. My dad, a no-nonsense man with a strict sense of duty, worked in law enforcement, while my mom was the nurturing anchor of our family, often dedicating her time to volunteering at the community center. From an early age, they instilled in me the importance of structure and integrity, values that, ironically, would be tested more times than I could have ever imagined as I grew older. The first time I tasted betrayal, I was just 12 years old. It was when my best friend, Mark, lied to me about breaking my dad's prized fishing rod. I discovered the truth by accident and, feeling both hurt and confused, confronted him about it. It might seem trivial now, but at the time, it left a lasting impression. That experience planted the first seeds of mistrust in my young mind, shaping how I'd come to approach relationships in the future. After that incident, Mark and I slowly drifted apart, and by the time we reached high school, he was little more than a distant memory. In high school, I found a passion that gave me purpose: civil engineering. I was drawn to the idea of creating structures that could stand the test of time, symbols of strength and permanence. Around that same time, I met Laura in my sophomore science class. She was the kind of girl who could captivate a room without even trying, bright, tech-savvy, with a quick wit and a radiant smile that was impossible to ignore. We started as friends, bonding over homework and sitting together at lunch, but by junior year, that friendship had evolved into something deeper. Laura quickly became the centerpiece of my world, not just my girlfriend, but my confidant, my partner in every adventure. We spent late nights poring over textbooks and weekends exploring the world together. By the time we were seniors, I believed our relationship was unshakable, strong enough to weather any storm life might throw at us. As the years went on, though, things started to shift in ways I couldn't ignore. At first, it was subtle. Laura, who had always been so focused and driven, began to pull away. Dinners that we used to cherish were cancelled more and more often, replaced by vague excuses about work commitments. The sparkle in her eyes dimmed, and her once vibrant personality grew quieter, more detached. I tried to tell myself it was just the stress of her career. After all, she was thriving professionally, but a small, nagging unease started to take root. It wasn't until weeks later that my unease turned into something far more concrete. At first it was just whispers, little signs that I had been too distracted, or maybe too unwilling, to see clearly. Then, one seemingly ordinary day, everything unraveled. A series of events unfolded, forcing me to confront the truths I had tried so desperately to ignore. That's how I found myself there, standing by my car, the weight of my suspicions crushing me as I waited to face what I already feared was true. It was a moment I never wanted to reach, but one I knew I couldn't avoid. A single detail stood out in my mind: the license plate of a nearby car, 128, an image that would forever be burned into my memory. That day marked the beginning of the end, shattering the fragile stability I had clung to for so long. I waited in silence, the weight of anticipation heavy in the air. The faint creak of a door opening snapped me out of my thoughts. They stepped out together, their movements deliberate yet hesitant. Her eyes met mine for the briefest of moments before she quickly looked away, her face pale as though she'd been caught in an unthinkable act. Sliding off the hood of the car, I noticed him raise his hand slightly, as if preparing to defend himself. My voice was calm, but the edge of finality in it was unmistakable. "Don't worry. Neither of you is worth the trouble." Without waiting for a response, I turned, walked to my car, got in, and drove away, leaving them frozen in their discomfort. Whatever came next was their burden to bear, not mine. The road that led to that moment was a long one, paved with memories I'd once cherished. Jim and I first met when we were just 8 years old, back when his family moved into the house next door. In a neighborhood filled with girls our age, we were the only two boys. Naturally, we became inseparable, more like brothers than friends. By the end of 4th grade, we had each other's backs in everything, from Little League to mischief and every adventure in between. That bond remained unbroken throughout high school. If someone messed with Jim, they'd have to deal with me, and vice versa. By senior year, we were still thick as thieves. Jim was dating Annabelle Spears, and the four of us often went on double dates. Prom night was a milestone for all of us. While Laura and I took the next step in our relationship in one room, Jim and Annabelle did the same in another. But as life often does, it pulled us in different directions after graduation. Jim chose the Navy over college, and though we promised to stay close, the distance between us grew over time. Laura and I stayed together, weathering the storms of young adulthood, or so I thought. Over time, cracks began to show. Whispers reached me through mutual friends, rumors that Laura was seeing other guys at her school. At first, I dismissed them as baseless gossip. But one night, everything changed. It was late, and I decided to drop by unannounced. As I approached her dorm, I saw her walking out, laughing as she climbed into a car with another guy. My stomach dropped. Against my better judgment, I followed them to a restaurant on Ann Arbor Road. After waiting 10 minutes in my car, I stepped inside. My eyes scanned the room until I spotted them, tucked away in a corner booth, sitting far too close for comfort. His arm draped around her shoulder, and she didn't seem to mind. I took a seat at a booth where I could watch without being seen. When Laura finally noticed me, her reaction was immediate, her face went pale, and she straightened up, pulling away from him. The tension between us was palpable when we spoke later that night. "Where were you?" she asked, her tone sharp as if trying to shift the focus. "I went to a party," I replied curtly. "And as for my phone, I turned it off." Her expression darkened, arms crossing defensively. "Why didn't you call me if you weren't coming over?" "I figured you already had other plans, with your boyfriend," I said, keeping my voice even. Her jaw dropped, but she quickly recovered. "What are you talking about? You're my boyfriend." "Then who was the guy at the restaurant Thursday night?" I folded my arms, meeting her gaze. She stammered, "He's just a friend." "A friend?" I repeated, my tone growing sharper. "Sitting hip to hip, with his arm around you. That's just friendly." She fell silent, unable to defend what I'd seen with my own eyes. Letting go of someone who'd been such a central part of my life wasn't easy. It hurt in ways I didn't think it could, but I knew dragging things out would only make it worse. Sometimes, facing the truth head-on is the only way to move forward. And in that moment, I chose to let go, for her, for him, but most importantly, for me. Earlier in the week, I was buried under a mountain of homework and didn't get the chance to call Robin until Thursday. When we finally talked, we hit it off, chatting for a while before setting up a date for Friday night. That evening, I picked her up, and after dinner, she suggested skipping the movie we'd planned and heading to a party she'd heard about. The party was at an apartment in Belleville, and we got there just after 8 p.m. It was already packed, the energy buzzing as people milled around, laughing and chatting over music. We hadn't been there long when I noticed Laura. Our eyes met for a split second before she quickly looked away, pretending to focus on her drink. Robin noticed the exchange. "How do you know her?" she asked cautiously. I hesitated for a moment before answering, keeping my tone steady. "I'm the guy she once said she was going to marry," I replied. "At least, until I caught her with that other guy last week." Robin's eyes widened in surprise. "Wow. So, fireworks tonight?" "Not a chance," I said, shaking my head. "We broke up on Sunday. It's done." She raised an eyebrow, smirking a little. "What are the odds you would have asked me out if last Thursday hadn't happened?" "Pretty slim," I admitted, meeting her gaze with a faint smile. "But Thursday did happen." Robin tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. You think maybe she's uncomfortable seeing you here with someone else? I shrugged, unconcerned. That's her problem. She's the one who ended things. Maybe so, Robin replied, glancing over at Laura. But she sure doesn't look happy about it. She'll have to get used to it, I said flatly, my tone firm. Robin turned back to me with a teasing smile. So, does this mean I'll be seeing you again? Or are you planning to date every girl you meet? I chuckled, enjoying her playfulness. Let's just see where this goes. The next morning, I came downstairs to find Mom waiting in the kitchen, a cup of tea in hand. Laura's already called twice, she said pointedly, looking at me over the rim of her mug. Not until I've had coffee, I grumbled, heading straight for the coffee pot. Mom raised an eyebrow. Things aren't going well between you two, huh? I poured myself a cup and leaned against the counter. It's not just about us anymore. She tilted her head, curious. Does she know that? She should, I replied. She's the one who opened that door. Before Mom could press further, the phone rang again. She picked it up but handed it to me almost immediately. It was Laura. I sighed and reluctantly took the call. Her voice was anxious, almost pleading. I just want to talk. Don't bother, I interrupted. I'm done. Give me back my ring and Letterman jacket. They're meaningless to you anyway. Goodbye. I hung up the phone, a strange sense of relief washing over me. Mom, who had overheard the conversation, gave me a small, approving nod. She made her choice, she said softly, and so did you. Meanwhile, Robin and I started spending more time together. Around the same period, I was getting letters from Jim. He had completed boot camp and was now training to become a Navy SEAL. Despite the changes happening in my own life, it was good to hear from him, and his letters always reminded me of simpler times. As for Laura, her true colors had surfaced over the years, though I hadn't always noticed. Looking back, there were signs she wasn't as committed to me as I was to her. But the real bombshell dropped when I suggested she start looking for an engagement ring. That's when she revealed her post-graduation plans that didn't include me. I'm moving back to California, she said, almost casually, to marry my childhood sweetheart. He's studying in England on a Rhodes Scholarship. I was floored. Wait, what? You've been planning this the whole time? She nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable. He and I have an open relationship. We agreed it wasn't realistic to go years without being physical with other people. He knows about you, and he's okay with it. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. He's okay with it. And you? Always, she said softly. Then, as if it was the most natural thing in the world, she hugged me and whispered, one last night together. Please. A week later, she was gone. By Friday night, I was back home, trying to settle into life without Robin. I had a school article to finish, so I was hunched over my desk, typing away, when Mom called from downstairs, Rob, someone's here to see you. I walked down, curious, and there she was, Laura. She and Mom were chatting casually in the entryway, but the moment I appeared, Mom gave me a knowing look and slipped into the kitchen, leaving us alone. Hi, Rob, Laura said, her tone tentative. Hi, I replied, unsure of where this was going. What brings you here? She shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. Robin called me, she admitted. She said you're back on the market. I blinked, caught off guard. Did she? Laura nodded, a small, nervous smile playing on her lips. She said I should come and see you. I raised an eyebrow. And what do you think about that? She tilted her head slightly, considering my question. Then, with a playful grin, she said, what time should I be ready? Ready? I repeated, caught between amusement and surprise. Around 9. I replied, keeping my tone casual. Her grin widened. Good. You've got a date. Not long after, Laura and I moved into a small two-bedroom apartment halfway between Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti. It was cozy, and we made it our own. We converted the second bedroom into an office, where we set up desks, one for her computer and one for my work. Things felt steady, comfortable. About a month later, Jim came home on leave, and he and Annabelle often hung out with us. They seemed genuinely happy together, which made me feel hopeful for all of us. But life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. When Jim took a 4-month job in Alaska, everything unraveled. Annabelle, left on her own, quickly started seeing someone else, Jim's boss, Gary Mellows. By the time Laura and Annabelle ran into each other at their doctor's office, Annabelle was already 7 weeks pregnant. It didn't take a genius to figure out the timing. Jim had been away for over 3 months. The truth eventually reached Jim through mutual friends. Furious and heartbroken, he flew home unannounced, rented a car, and parked near his house to see what was happening for himself. When he spotted Gary entering the house, Jim waited 15 minutes before walking in. What followed was chaos, shouting, accusations, and Annabelle's tearful denials. Gary, trying to defuse the situation, made things worse, exposing the entire affair in a fit of defensiveness. When the dust settled, Jim filed for divorce and took Gary to court, alleging misconduct that ultimately damaged his reputation and career. In a surprising twist, the jury sided with Jim, awarding him $1.3 million in damages. After paying court costs and taxes, Jim walked away with just over $750,000. He used the money to pay off his house, install an in-ground pool, and buy himself a new Ford F-350. It was a bittersweet victory. Once the divorce was finalized, Annabelle vanished, and rumors swirled that she'd left town altogether. As for Gary, his life took a hit too. He had to sell off equipment and property to cover the judgment, and his business began to crumble as clients abandoned him. A few months later, I was wrapping up a lunch meeting with a potential client when, of all people, Gary Mellows approached me. "Can I buy you a drink?" he asked, his voice low but polite. I studied him for a moment. As far as I was concerned, I didn't hold any personal grudge against Gary. If Annabelle had thrown herself at him, it wasn't entirely his fault for giving in. That said, I'd never fully believed the rumors about him scheming to send Jim away so he could swoop in. "Sure," I said finally. "One drink." As we sat down, I couldn't help but wonder what he hoped to accomplish. Maybe he wanted redemption. Or maybe, like so many others in this tangled mess, he just wanted to be heard. I always had a hunch about how Annabelle's affair with Gary might have started. I figured she probably visited his office under the guise of picking up Jim's paycheck and made her intentions perfectly clear. But when I finally got the story straight from Gary's mouth, it was almost worse than I imagined. She came into my office, shut the door, and started taking her clothes off, Gary admitted, leaning back in his chair. "She told me, you sent Jim away, so you'll have to take care of me while he's gone." What was I supposed to do? "I'm single," and Annabelle was persuasive. I raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. He sighed and continued, bitterness creeping into his voice. "As far as I'm concerned, this is Jim's fault. Everyone knows Annabelle's reputation. He should have seen it coming." I let out a frustrated sigh. "Regardless, you slept with her. So why go after him now?" Gary's expression hardened. "Because he ruined me with that lawsuit. You have any idea what it's like to lose everything you built because of one mistake? I'm rebuilding now, but I'm not stopping until I make back every penny he took, and then some." "And if Jim retaliates?" I asked, my tone sharp. Gary chuckled darkly. "Let him try. I learned my lesson after that first confrontation. If he comes at me again, I'll be ready." He stood, straightening his jacket, and tossed one final remark over his shoulder. By the way, if you're interested in selling, let me know. As I left the meeting, my mind raced. I was reeling from the layers of betrayal and manipulation I'd uncovered, but what truly shook me was what came next, my realization that Laura and Jim had been carrying on behind my back for over a year. The signs, if there had been any, were so subtle I had missed them entirely. Or maybe I just didn't want to see them. When it came time to untangle myself from the mess, I knew I had to act carefully. Laura's lawyer was already circling, and I realized I'd have to bend the truth to keep my share of the assets. Even so, I knew she'd likely get something. That's when I struck a deal with Gary. I sold him my portion of the company, but on paper, it appeared I'd sold it for only a third of its actual value. That amount went into a personal bank account under my name. The remaining 2/3? It went straight into an offshore account I'd set up beforehand. The arrangement was simple: Gary wouldn't step into the office or occupy my desk until the next morning. That gave me the time I needed to finalize everything. The next morning, after Laura left for work, I wasted no time. First, I called a locksmith to change all the locks on the house. By 9 a.m., the job was done. Then, I headed to the bank and drained every account we shared, including the safety deposit box. My lawyer had advised me to take only half, but I wasn't in the mood to play fair. Laura could fight for her share later if she wanted to. I also withdrew the amount I expected to receive from the business sale. If Jim had any issue with how I handled things, he could take me to court. As I left the bank, the weight of the past year seemed to press down on me. I had been betrayed, blindsided, and used by the people closest to me. Now, it was my turn to call the shots. As I drove away, I thought about something Gary had said to me during our meeting. You know how these things work, don't you? How does it feel to be on the receiving end for a change? I clenched the steering wheel, a mix of anger and determination coursing through me. The truth was, it didn't feel great. But if there was one thing I'd learned from all of this, it was how to adapt. I wasn't going to let anyone else dictate how my life unfolded, not Laura, not Jim, and definitely not Gary. This time, I was taking control. I called Gary Mellows that afternoon to finalize everything. It's done, I told him curtly. Enjoy your first day in the office tomorrow. I didn't wait for a reply before hanging up. From there, I headed straight to the airport, parked my car in long-term parking, and tossed my phone into the glove compartment without a second thought. Within hours, I was on a flight to Cabo San Lucas. For a week, I buried myself in the serenity of scuba diving, long walks on the beach, and pure relaxation. It was exactly what I needed to clear my head and gain some perspective. When I finally turned my phone back on, the flood of voicemails was staggering. Most were from Laura, her tone swinging wildly between apologetic, angry, and pleading. I listened to a few before hearing one that hit a nerve. You had no right to throw me out, she spat. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly as I called her back. No right? I snapped when she answered. Just like you had the right to stab me in the back. We're done, Laura. Goodbye. The satisfaction of cutting her off and leaving her belongings in the house was undeniable. It was petty, maybe, but after everything she'd done, it felt deserved. Later, I called Maria, our company's receptionist, to check in. How's everything going over there? I asked, bracing myself. For me? Not bad, she replied with a dry tone. For the company? Total disaster. Jim and Gary are at each other's throats constantly. They argue about everything, no matter how trivial. I couldn't help but smirk. Maybe it's a blessing in disguise for both of us. Oh. How do you figure? I asked. It means you're single, Maria teased, a playful edge in her voice. And maybe I'll finally get my shot. I laughed, surprised by her boldness. I thought you were engaged. I was, until 3 weeks ago, when I caught him doing what Laura did to you. Well, Maria, I said, smiling despite myself, when I'm ready to date again, I'll make sure your name is at the top of the list. I'll hold you to that, she said with a laugh. In the meantime, don't be a stranger. That day, my phone stayed busier than I expected. I got word that one of the loaders at the company had run out of fuel. When Jim called Allied Fuel to complain, he found out that the delivery had been cancelled. And who cancelled it? Me. I'd decided the prices were too high and told Allied Fuel I was looking for better options. That didn't sit well with Jim, who immediately confronted me about it. I heard you two came to blows, I said later, intrigued. Gary chuckled on the other end of the line. We did. I overestimated my chances in a fistfight with him, but I got a few kicks in. Sounds messy, I said. Oh, it was, Gary replied. But Jim's temper was bound to catch up with him sooner or later. Eventually, Jim and I had our own confrontation. He wanted to know why I'd sold out to Gary. When he asked, there was no anger in his voice, just confusion. Why'd you do it? He asked. Why'd you sell out to Mellows? I stared at him for a moment before answering. Because if I hadn't, I might have handled things in a way that would have landed me behind bars. And you, Jim? You're not worth that. But I figured Mellows would give you the kind of misery that lasts longer. Jim didn't have a response to that. He just stood there, the weight of our fractured friendship hanging in the air between us. The truth was, by selling to Gary, I'd effectively washed my hands of the whole mess. But what lingered wasn't anger, it was disappointment. In Laura, in Jim, and even in myself for letting things get this far. As I walked away from Jim, I realized I was done looking back. Whatever came next, it wouldn't involve the wreckage of the life I was leaving behind. I scheduled an interview for the following Tuesday, already picturing what life might look like in a city where the sun was a constant companion. It was a hopeful distraction, but Monday brought me back to the harsh reality of the situation. At the hearing, the judge dismissed the restraining order, granting Laura access to the house again. She arrived with her lawyer, but as they approached, I held up a hand to stop them. You don't talk to me without my attorney, I said curtly. Laura's expression was unreadable as she spoke. I just wanted to let you know I'll be coming by tonight. No, you won't, I replied flatly. I'm flying out tonight. You'll need to arrange a time when I'm not here. Later that evening, I sat at the kitchen table, my thoughts interrupted by the sound of Laura and her lawyer entering the house. I let them in but immediately headed outside to mow the lawn. By the time I finished and went back inside, the lawyer was gone, and only Laura remained. She sat at the kitchen table, calmly sipping tea as if nothing had happened. When she looked up at me, her face was calm, but her words carried weight. You lied, she said, her voice flat. You didn't give my things to Goodwill. Maybe not, I admitted with a shrug. But I sure did enjoy how angry it made you to think I had. She sighed, setting her cup down. I didn't think this divorce would get so serious. Be serious, Laura, I replied, my tone firm. There's no way I can stay married to you after what you did. That doesn't matter, she said, her voice rising. I love you, Rob. You know I do. What happened with Jim was just a mistake, a stupid, thoughtless mistake. I've always liked Jim, but I never loved him. I love you. I stared at her in disbelief. It doesn't matter whether you loved him or not, you still cheated. You knew how I'd feel about that, especially after what happened between Annabelle and Jim. Remember how angry I was for him? How do you think I'd react when it's my own wife? It wasn't about love, she insisted, her voice trembling. It was just excitement. I never neglected you, Rob. I love you. We don't have to end things. We can fix this. I laughed bitterly. Fix it? How? I'll never trust you again, Laura. You betrayed me. If I stayed, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering if you'd do it again. And based on what you just admitted, you didn't stop because you regret it, you stopped because you got caught. How am I supposed to believe anything you promise now, when you've already broken the most important one you made when we got married? Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't let that stop me. It's over, Laura. You need to leave. Over the next 2 days, I packed up my belongings, carefully labeling boxes and putting most of them in storage. I didn't feel like the house was mine anymore, not with all the memories we'd built there now tainted. I moved into a temporary apartment at the executive suites, just a stopgap until I figured out my next steps. For the following 2 weeks, I traveled across the country for job interviews, trying to build a future that didn't include Laura. Salt Lake City, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Chicago, Detroit, I went wherever the opportunities led me. Each new city offered a fresh start, a chance to escape the wreckage of my old life. But no matter how far I traveled, I couldn't escape the weight of her betrayal. It clung to me like a shadow, whispering reminders of how everything I'd once trusted had crumbled. Still, I knew there was no going back. All I could do now was keep moving forward, one step at a time. I felt optimistic about the interviews I'd completed, though I hadn't heard back from any of the companies immediately. One evening, as I sat at my desk reviewing my finances, I realized I could afford to live comfortably for 6 years without needing to rush into anything. That gave me some breathing room, a rare luxury after the chaos of the past few months. In the meantime, life had its share of ironic twists. Word reached me that Jim's temper had gotten him into trouble again, this time with Gary. The two had a falling out so severe that Jim had allegedly mistreated Laura, forcing her to file a restraining order against him. I didn't care about either of them anymore, but the irony made me laugh. For now, I decided to hold off on any major decisions until the divorce was finalized. Soon, the responses from the companies I'd interviewed with began trickling in. One, based in San Diego, invited me back for a follow-up. I was thrilled and had just started arranging my travel when my phone buzzed. It was Gary Mellows. "How'd you like to own your old company again?" Gary asked without preamble. I leaned back in my chair, skeptical. "What's the catch?" "No catch," Gary replied casually. "I've shifted focus to construction and moved all the equipment and projects to my other company. That leaves the engineering side stripped down. I thought about starting fresh, but then I figured, why bother? I'd rather sell it back to you." I laughed, unsure if he was serious. "I don't think I can afford to buy it. I can't pay for both halves." "You won't have to," Gary said. "The company's value has dropped since I pulled out most of the assets. I'll sell it to you for what I paid Jim. And, to sweeten the deal, I'll throw in the lawsuit I filed against him." I was stunned. The chance to reclaim the company I'd helped build, without the baggage it had accumulated under Gary's ownership, was tempting. After a quick call to my lawyer, I told Gary, deal. Back at my temporary apartment at the executive suites, I couldn't stop smiling. In 3 weeks, I'd have a fresh start, a new job in San Diego, my old company back in my hands, a new girlfriend in my life, and money in the bank. I could have spent that time house hunting or shopping for furniture, but instead, I decided to savor the sweet turn of events. Now, as I sit in my new office, surrounded by blueprints and drafts of projects I'd once only dreamed of, I can't help but marvel at how far I've come. There's a deep satisfaction in creating something from the ashes, knowing that every step forward is mine alone. Of course, the memories of Laura and Jim still creep in from time to time, unbidden and unwelcome. But they no longer sting. Time has dulled the sharp edges of their betrayal, leaving behind lessons rather than wounds. From Laura, I learned that love without trust is nothing more than an empty shell. From Jim, I realized that even the strongest friendships can snap under the weight of selfishness and deceit. Those lessons have made me stronger, sharper, and more discerning. Every so often, I hear whispers of their lives, rumors that Laura moved back home and Jim went back to Alaska, but they're little more than echoes now. Their paths no longer intersect with mine, and I'm perfectly fine with that. Whatever life throws my way next, I know I'll face it with the strength I've gained, the lessons I've learned, and the people who truly matter by my side. Life isn't about the storms we endure, it's about the skies we find after the clouds have cleared. And right now, my skies have never been brighter.